step-by-step description of changes that you expect within the heart in response to action potential. The purple color here indicates the contraction process. So the spread of the action potential within the atria first, that would lead to atrial contraction. Spread of the action potential through the ventricles, then the ventricular contraction. Ventricular contraction is shown again here, but this is now going to allow the relaxation of the four chambers. Then the new action potential starts and same cycle repeats. Electrocardiogram, ECG or EKG is what is shown here. There are four action potentials recorded. Each one has several distinct parts. P wave is atrial depolarization, QRS wave is ventricular depolarization, T wave is ventricular repolarization. When you see the ventricular depolarization, that's the same time at which atrial repolarization occurs, but you cannot see that because of the large size of this QRS complex. In addition to these key parts within the ECG, you also notice PR interval, that is the time between the beginning of the atrial depolarization to the beginning of the ventricular depolarization. And similarly, QT interval is the beginning of the ventricular depolarization to the end of ventricular repolarization. This is about twice as long as the PR interval. And additional details are PR segment and ST segment. These are ways one can actually compare normal ECG to an abnormal ECG to tell where problems exist. So the PR interval takes about 0.16 seconds, and it is the duration of time between the beginning of the P wave and the beginning of the QRS wave. Represents the time between the beginning of atrial contraction and the beginning of ventricular contraction. Please note that electrical changes lead to actual muscle contraction. So during this time is when you expect the atrial contraction. That is, during the spreading of action potential from the atria to the ventricles is when atrial contraction occurs. And QT interval is about 0.35 seconds. It's about twice as long as PR interval is. And this is when you expect ventricular contraction. During this window of time, during the QT interval, that is when the depolarization spreads through the ventricles and also repolarization occurs. You would expect ventricular contraction. What you see here is combining the changes that we saw earlier within the heart to the EKG. So you're looking at P wave here, that is atrial depolarization, spreading of depolarization within the atria. Next, you see the spread of depolarization in the EKG, at which time you see atrial contraction. Now the spread of depolarization into the ventricles here, and then the ventricular contraction. Ventricular contraction happens when the depolarization has ended and now repolarization is about to begin. Okay, so here it's still ventricular contraction, the tail end of that, and ventricular repolarization here, T wave, at which time ventricles are still contracting. And when you see the end of ventricular repolarization is when you have the diastole, or the relaxation of the ventricles. Some of the details that you could see is the size of the chambers. Here the size is made smaller for the atria, size is made smaller for the ventricles in both places, whereas size is made longer here for the ventricles, showing that it is in the relaxation.